On Easter, I typically like to start with Happy Easter, but that video was just the exact opposite, literally, right? Well, the good news is that's not talking about today. That's talking about next week. It's inviting you to next week. And you need to know that the series that we're planning on starting next week is really about happiness. Everybody wants it. Everybody's pursuing it. How do you get it? And we've basically just kind of turned the idea on its head because the pursuit inside our culture after happiness is more and more locked into identity and sexuality. But at the same time, our unhappiness quotients are going up. Depression and anxiety are at record highs right now. So we're going to examine what that looks like. And I think you'll really enjoy it. I think you'll find it interesting. And I also think you'll find new ways to find happiness in life because all of us want that, right? So with that said, I do want to say Happy Easter to all of you who are watching over in Henderson. We have our West Side campus in Evansville, we have our East Side campus in Evansville, and there are many people who join us online, and it's great to have everybody together. And actually, at the end of this sermon, we're going to do something together that we haven't done in a long time, so that I'll be looking forward to that. So I want to start by asking you a question, because we have a wide audience and probably a lot of different perspectives. But the first question is this: do you believe in an afterlife? Do you believe in an afterlife? And then why do you believe in an afterlife if you do? And then finally, when it comes to the afterlife and you say you do believe in it, what do you think it entails? What do you think is involved with it? What does it look like? There's a lot of interesting statistics out about this kind of thing. Did you know that just under 75% of all American adults say that they believe not only in afterlife, but they believe in heaven? Just a little under 75%. Now, of that 75%, there's a group of people who would say about themselves they're of no particular religion. They don't identify with the religion at all, but among those people, half of them believe in heaven. Not only that, people who describe themselves as agnostic, meaning I don't think you can know if there's a God, I don't know if there is, and all that kind of thing, 26% of them believe in heaven. Well, get this. Of atheists, people who do not believe in God and presumably don't even believe in the spiritual, 3% of them say they believe in heaven. So heaven and the afterlife is a very, very popular idea. And the good news is that Easter, much of it is about that. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at Easter kind of through the lens of this whole question about the afterlife and all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a couple of passages here in a moment that speak in a number of ways to this. But before I do, I want to frame up what the resurrection is really all about and what it's designed to do, kind of its purpose for our purposes in the Bible. There's 4 different ones. I'm sure there's a number of different ones, but there's 4 ones that I want to focus in on. The 4 purposes, as it were, of the resurrection are: number 1, the resurrection confirms Jesus' lordship. The resurrection confirms Jesus' lordship. Jesus went around saying a whole lot of very wild things and things that were very much about him having authority that men don't have, things like that. He actually says he's going to be the one that calls people out of their graves. He makes that claim about himself. The resurrection, one of its purposes is to confirm he really is the one that is going to do this. He is the one he claims to be. And you think about this, in our world, especially with the internet and everything, voices are clamoring all the time to tell us how to live, how to be happy, what direction to go, what kind of decisions we ought to be making. Well, the number one voice you ought to be listening to is the voice of Jesus, because he rose again from the dead. The second one's this: the resurrection gives us hope in the face of death. One of the coolest things that the New Testament does is it not only presents Jesus as rising again from the dead, it says that he's the first in line. He's the first and most important, but if you're a believer in him and you're a follower of his, you will be resurrected from the dead in the same way that he does. And that's incredible to know. And you got to get this, that it's evidence-based hope in the face of death, meaning that it's tied to history. It's not just tied to a nice idea. The resurrection's not just a wishful thinking. It is something that we can know and we can rely on. Number 3, the purpose of the resurrection is it's to give us a glimpse of the afterlife. Now, this is where I'm going to zoom in the most today. It gives us a glimpse of the afterlife. What is it going to be like? What can we kind of look forward to when it comes to this kind of stuff? Now, I need to tell you that the term afterlife is not actually used in the Bible. Jesus and the apostles, they used the word heaven, but I'm going to use a term that maybe we don't use as much, but they did. And they would describe heaven, or what we're looking forward to, as, quote, the coming age. We're in an age now. There's another age coming that's post-resurrection that we're going to be living in. And the resurrection, and Jesus' resurrection especially, gives us a glimpse of kind of what it's going to be like. And that's what we're going to be looking at primarily. But then finally, the resurrection, one of its key purposes is it inspires and encourages us here and now. Because I'm sure as soon as I start talking about afterlife and all that, especially the younger you are, you're thinking, this is not really relevant to me. It is to you, old man. You know, so you probably are very, very interested in that. But I'm not interested in that yet. I'm going to wait till I'm in my 80s or whatever else. But the resurrection is not really designed to do that. It's supposed to, as we understand it and we really come to believe in it increasingly, what it can do is twofold. Number one, it can have you look around at the suffering and the struggles and the death that's present in life, and it can help you believe in and lock on to the line, this is not the end of the story. This is not the end of the story. You drive past a cemetery. This is not the end of the story. The resurrection confirms that. That's what it's for. But it's also supposed to function in your own heart and soul. This is kind of a lightweight way of putting it, but it's supposed to function kind of like an upcoming vacation is. You know, summer break's coming up from school. You may be looking forward to a vacation that you're going to take. And do you ever notice that kind of puts a little bit more of energy in your steps? And so the resurrection functions like that. It's supposed to be an encouragement and ongoing motivation. Okay, so those are the kind of the four sides of the frame. Now we're going to read a passage from the book of John, and then I'm going to talk about another one that gives us insight in all these four things. All right, so here we go. So it says this in the book of John, chapter 20, beginning at verse 19. So when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, Sunday, and when the doors were shut where the disciples were, for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." And when he had said this, he showed them both his hands and his side. The disciples then rejoiced when they saw the Lord. So Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I also send you." Now that's a simple passage, but it is packed full of important ideas. Especially, and I said, we're going to focus in on what is the afterlife like, primarily, more than any other thing. And from this passage, here's something we can learn. Let me give you one of a couple. The coming age is supra-physical. The coming age is supra-physical. And you may be thinking about right now, oh, well, thank you so much. I'm glad I came to this Easter service to learn something like the resurrection and the coming age is supra-physical. What does that even mean? Well, this is not a Bible phrase. This is a phrase that I coined based on this passage, but also passages like it. Because in the resurrection appearances, you have something very interesting going on. Now, the word supra means above and beyond. So in other words, it's saying physical plus, above and beyond the physical. It includes the physical, and that's evident by a couple of things in this short little paragraph. The first thing is, okay, so the setting is the disciples, it says they're behind locked doors. They're hiding, and they're hiding for good reason. They're hiding because they're next. They think they're next, and they have good reason to think they're next because their leader has been killed, brutally so. And so, of course, they're going to assume that the followers are going to be looked for. So they're hiding, they're behind locked doors. And then Jesus just kind of stands right there in the middle, just out of nowhere. Bang, that's the supra part. He's doing something that's not physical. He's doing something supernatural, something kind of wild, honestly. And that's why he says, "Peace be with you." And he does this in other resurrection appearances as well. You know, he shows up, and because some people at that point probably have wet clothing, he has to say, hey, it's all okay. It's all okay. But then he goes on to do something very important. And the book of Luke records this same story and gives a little bit of more detail. But Jesus starts going to the effort to show that he's not a ghost because they believe he's a ghost. Luke tells us that. They believe he's a ghost at this time. He appears in the room. Well, for good reason. He died and he appears. So that's what we call a ghost. But they're thinking, okay, he's going to be a ghost that you kind of run your hands through, just sort of this phantom, wispy kind of thing, immaterial, right? But he goes to the trouble to show them that he's physical. It says he points out his hands and his side. He had a spear shoved in his side, and that mark is still there. He had nails driven through his hands. Those marks are still there. Now, the big question is, why would he do this? And one of the key answers is, he wants to show them that he's physical. Now, here's why this is important. It would have been the easiest thing in the world for these guys to do if they're making up this story about Jesus. And it would have been more natural to do. To have him, he dies at the end of the story, everybody does, hey, our very religious master that told us all these things and did all these wonderful things, he died this bloody, terrible death, and I know he's laying over there and he's a corpse, but his spirit is alive. He's out there. He's a ghost. He's out there. He continues to do things. And why would they do that? Because that's what we do with every religious leader. That's what we do with people in general, when they die. He's out there somewhere. His spirit is still there. But instead, the story is very, very consistent that his dead body was dead for 3 days, but the dead body literally and physically comes out of its tomb. There is an empty tomb. The body has been restored. Now, I want you to hold that idea from that story. The very next chapter over in John is another story that kind of gets to this as well. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of tell it, okay? And read one very key passage from it. So the scene is the disciples are in a boat. They were fishermen, and they had been fishing all night. And they're trying to fish, and then as they come into the shore, about 100 yards off, they see someone on the shore. There's a guy over there, and the guy says, hey, how'd the fishing go? And they say, we didn't catch anything. And he says, try throwing your net on the other side of the boat, which I'm sure came across as, oh, well, there's a brilliant idea. But they go ahead and do it for whatever reason. But when they do, there's tons of fish. They make this huge catch. And at that moment, they realize that's exactly what happened the very first time we met Jesus. It's Jesus. It's a resurrection appearance. So they go to the shore. But what they find on the shore when they see Jesus is very, very important, teaching us what the new and coming age is going to be like and what the resurrection really is. When they come to shore, Jesus is there, and he's got a little campfire going, and he's cooking. And then he says, and I quote, Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Come and have breakfast. So in other words, the Lord God King resurrected Jesus, who died on the cross for the world's sins, was beaten within an inch of his life, and then he dies. He succumbs to his wounds. He's put in a tomb. He conquers death. Now, you can imagine whenever the apostles went throughout the world, it says they were sent, right? They were going throughout the world. They're telling this story. People kind of wonder, what was it like when you saw him, when he resurrected? Were lightning bolts coming out of his eyes? Was he hovering over the ground? What was he doing? What was it like? Was he shining? Was there a bright light? No. He had a little campfire, and he was cooking some stuff, and he said, come and have breakfast. I mean, I love what C.S. Lewis said, the writer. He said, the New Testament can be delightfully humdrum. That is delightfully humdrum. It also needs to be noticed that it gives a picture of the coming age and what it's going to be like. I want you to notice something. You ever take notice of this? That every restaurant that serves like a true, large, hearty, traditional breakfast in the mornings are packed. There's few things better than breakfast food, right? So Jesus invites them. He says, come and have breakfast. Now, why does that matter? Because number one, he's physical. Number two, he's a picture. He's a portrait of the coming age. And on one hand, he's appeared in rooms. There's things about the coming age. Remember, it's not only showing Jesus' resurrection, but our resurrection. And what's coming in the coming age is some supernatural stuff that we don't quite understand. I personally hope we were able to fly. Don't know that. But there's things that will remain. And you know how the Bible often pictures the next life, the coming age, is doing things like sitting at a meal. Why? Because you ever notice that in this life, especially around holidays, you're probably doing this for Easter. Getting together with family, friends. One of the greatest things in life is to sit around and have a great meal and have conversation and laughter. The New Testament is delightfully humdrum. Jesus was physical, and he literally says in his resurrected body, as he's giving a picture of the coming age, come, here, have some breakfast. And so they had, it says they had fish, but I'm convinced they also had biscuits and gravy, and the pancakes were there, and there was probably, the fish was wrapped in bacon, the whole bit. Why does this matter on a deeper level? There's a great book out called The Resurrection of the Son of God. I've commended to you before. It's written by a guy named N.T. Wright. And N.T. Wright's The Resurrection of the Son of God is about an 800-page book. Okay, it's a very, very thick exploration. And his basic thesis is he's going back and looking at how people thought and how they would have thought around Jesus' time when the resurrection was being claimed. Like when Jesus rose again from the dead and the apostles were going out and they've said he rose again from the dead. What would have been the mindset of the people that heard that message? How would they have received it? And basically he makes the case that the disciples almost could not have made up the story, especially saying things like, yeah, he rose again from the dead and he told us to eat breakfast. They never would have said that. And the reason is because first of all, on the Jewish side, Jewish people had no idea of one guy rising again from the dead. They believed that everybody would someday, but not one guy. But more than that, non-Jewish people never envisioned the next life as being physical at all. And the reason was because physical was considered a bad thing. Think about this though, and you can understand why they would. Physical back then, before modern medicine, modern hospitals, modern sanitation and indoor plumbing and all that kind of thing, physical would have been pretty disgusting and pretty painful. They were surrounded by death. They were used to plagues and pandemics. That was a part of their life, and they had no defense against these things. They were used to seeing people just clunk over dead in the streets or being piled in the streets during plagues. They would have, think about this, gotten cancer and not even known it was in their bodies at all, and just would have gone through this insufferable pain and finally just died, right? In other words, they were trained in their mind to think of the physical world as a bad thing. The physical body is a bad thing, something you want to escape. And so when the Christians were coming along and said, God himself came down and took on actual physical flesh, and when he rose again from the dead and set up the coming age, he was born again and he came back in this flesh. They would have at first thought, that's a terrible idea. Who wants to come back in the flesh? That's an interesting idea. And he's saying they never could have made it up or never would have made it up and couldn't have sold it. But why is it important? It's important because, for a number of reasons, you know that the Christian faith has a very high view of the body, and our modern culture increasingly does not. You know, one of the early heresies, one of the early false teaching that was traveling throughout the church, because it was easier for people to believe, was something called Docetism. And Docetism was the belief that Jesus couldn't have come in a physical body, a real one. It just seemed like a physical body. He was actually a phantom because God would never take on something disgusting and smelly and painful and all that kind of stuff as we do. But that's not true. Docetism is a heresy. The real truth is that your future, the coming age, will be physical. There will be physical things about it. Physical is how you present yourself to the world. Physical is how Jesus presented himself to the world. It's how he died. It's how he rose again from the dead, all the way down to eating breakfast. I said it's being viewed less and less as a high thing in our modern culture. Here's a quote from a young man on a YouTube documentary that was dropped by the BBC. One young man said this, quote, "It doesn't matter what living meat skeleton you've been born in. What you feel is what defines you." You ever notice more and more people are getting that way? There's kind of this downgrading of the body, and somehow what goes on in here matters more than anything. That's not the Christian view. The Christian faith views us as human beings as an integrated whole, that you have an intellect, you have a spiritual dimension, you have an emotional dimension, and you have a physical dimension, and you will keep those dimensions through life. Now, why does that matter to me now, though? Okay, it's a nice idea. One way it matters is that one of the greatest temptations we always have is to separate our spiritual life from our real life. The temptation is to come to an Easter service on Easter and do the worship and listen to the sermon and do all the so-called spiritual things and then just go right back out to normal life later. Because the church is about the spiritual. It's about all the internal things. And out there, it's just the normal stuff. But again, the Christian faith sees life as an integrated whole, where the spiritual life that we do have is expressed in and through the physical. Paul says this in one of his letters. He tells the people, he says, honor God with your bodies. With your bodies. So whether you swing a hammer for a living or write down orders for a living or help people have the right medicine for a living or whatever it is you do, everywhere you go in life, your physical, your intellectual, every dimension of your life comes under the lordship of Christ, and that's what the ultimate picture of life is going to be. Let me give you one more picture of what the coming age is going to look like based upon Jesus' resurrection and these stories and his appearances. And it's this. In the coming age, scars remain. In the coming age, scars remain. Notice in the story that Jesus shows up, he appears, he says, peace be with you, and then he shows he's physical, but he shows he's physical by pointing to the holes in his hands and the hole in his side. Why? What is going on there with you? That's kind of strange. You think if he's resurrected physically, he would be completely restored. Here's another weird thing that happens. It doesn't happen in this story, but it does in the one that I just told about the fishing and all that. And in other places, it's very consistent that Jesus isn't recognized by his followers at first. They recognize him later. Now, some believe that's a spiritual thing. I think it's actually a physical thing because his scars remain. And there was one prophecy that said about him that his beard would have been ripped out and he would have been punched and everything. We don't know how much his scars did remain, but I think he looked different to them in his resurrected body. Why would he keep his scars? I think the main reason is because in the coming age, when you're there and death has been done away with and you're in your resurrected body and you're eating breakfast and you're having laughter with friends, anytime you see Jesus in his physical representation, you'll see those scars and you'll know why you're there. You'll know how you're there. You'll be reminded that you're not there because you're some great person and that you did a bunch of great things on earth and this is your reward. You'll be reminded that someone had to die for you all the time. Now, let me speculate just a little bit too. I think there's another reason. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that our scars will remain. But I have a theory that maybe they do. We're patterned after Jesus. He's the first one. And maybe it's not just our physical scars. How could the coming age be joyful if I remember my scars, if I remember my pain? I think we will. But the reason that I think we will is the same reason that we remember that Jesus died, that he went through this horrible suffering, this awful situation to get to this redeemed place. And I think one of the things that will make the coming age, the afterlife, truly remarkable and beautiful is that we'll remember our scars. It was about this time last year, a little over a year ago, that I had cancer surgery. And I see my scar every day. And anytime I really think about it, I think, wow, I'm glad that's in the rearview mirror. Think about the pain that you've been through. Think about someone you lost. Think about a hurt you've been through in life, but then think about in a coming age where all has been redeemed and there's no threat of death whatsoever at all possible anymore. Think about reuniting with that person that you lost. The memory of losing them and how awful that was and how you would give anything in life just to have them back. And you do in the coming age. I don't think you're supposed to forget it. I think it adds to the beauty, it adds to the depth, it adds to the wonder, it adds to the celebration of what will make the coming age the true, beautiful, resurrected, restored life. Is that we will remember our scars and we'll remember his scars. That's what makes it rich and amazing. Now, with that said, guys, we have a reason to worship. Because the resurrection is the confirmation that this stuff is not just wishful thinking. There is coming a new age that we are going to get to live in. If we're followers of Jesus, death may overtake us here, but it will be redeemed. And the scars may remain, but we'll only remember them, and that will be part. So we have a reason to celebrate. So here's how we're going to do it. Across all 3 of our campuses, and online, those of you who are joining online, you'll be able to watch us do this. Okay, we are going to do the same worship song to close up. Now, the context of this worship song is it's a portrait of the resurrection. It's actually taken from the Old Testament book of Ezekiel. And in the book of Ezekiel, the context of it is Ezekiel is a prophet of God, someone who speaks God's words to people, okay? And so he's a part of the nation of Israel, and they're in exile. Their nation, in other words, has been wiped out completely. And it looks like they're just over. And those who are surviving or living in another place, their nation looks like it's over. And they're all wondering, is it over? Well, God takes Ezekiel to this valley, and it says it this way. It says, this is in Ezekiel chapter 37. There was this valley of dry bones, rib cages and skulls and stuff everywhere. And dry bones means they've been there a long time. In other words, they're gone, they're hopeless, they're dead, and there ain't nothing coming back. But then it reads this way. Then God said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied, speaking for God, over the bones, as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling. I love that image of these bones. Okay, you picture dry bones, and you hear, it's kind of like this Indiana Jones sort of moment where these bones are coming together, and all of a sudden they're standing up, and there's tendons and flesh and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of disgusting on one hand, but pretty cool on the other. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and the skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. The next verse, breath comes in them. What it's doing is it's symbolizing the resurrection of Israel as a country. It's communicating that. But God has chosen to do it by giving this vivid picture of not Jesus' resurrection, but our resurrection, the resurrection of Israel, what resurrection actually looks like. And notice what it includes. It is bones, it is muscle, it is flesh, it is skin, it is you will live as your physical self, because we believe in the person being an integrated whole in the age that is to come. So what this song is it's a celebration, and it's a lot of fun. It's kind of a rock kind of thing. It'll be kind of loud for those of you who really aren't into that, but let's celebrate. Let's sing this song. It's called Rattle, and it kind of calls to mind that whole image, and it really speaks to the wonder and beauty of Easter, the wonder and beauty of the resurrection of Jesus, and the wonder and beauty of the promise that those who follow him are going to be resurrected. Let's sing that now.